Your story matters, don't let it fade. When everything changed, you were made.
Hey, and welcome back to One Stories, the podcast. I'm Wendy Babcock. Today I am joined with Courtney. Hi, Courtney. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so Courtney, on June 28th, did her one story. So let's jump into who is Courtney. So, Courtney, do you want to just share a little introduction of who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Courtney Hull, and I started in my career as a firefighter with a local fire department, and then soon after switched to an educational role in training firefighters and paramedics. And in my current role at the college that I work at, I've had a lot of opportunity to work in kind of some high stakes environments, train first responders, and in developing some conversations about the importance of building trust and relationship building and communication, because all of those things are really, really important, obviously, in responding to emergencies. And from there, a lot of the skill sets that I've learned to develop in both the classroom and on the fire ground, I found really translated to just everyday relationships too. And so that morphed into creating a company called Plugged In, which focuses on helping people find connection with each other and within themselves, and learning how to kind of communicate in those high stakes environments, whether it's again on the fire ground, in the classroom, or with a significant other, when you're not seeing eye to eye, or a friend that you're having a disagreement with. And so learning those communication skills, how to be vulnerable, how to build trust, all of those things are part of what we do with Plugged In.
I love that. So, plugged in, I love it because that just talks to communication, feeling seen, being a part of something, getting plugged in. So, in what capacity do you work with people? Is it trainings, speaking? What does that look like?
Yeah, mostly trainings and speaking right now. At some point, I'd like to expand into coaching and consulting. I've had a lot of people reach out just again with the experiences that I've had, asking for advice. And so I feel like that really kind of ties into a potential future coaching role, or consultant. A lot of the work that I have done has been with younger generations, kind of that traditional college age, and even high schoolers. And so a lot of people today, and I think this has been a generational thing for years and years and years, but a lot of people struggle with, how do I communicate or relate to this younger generation coming in to the workplace, or how do I better understand my high school son or daughter? And what we found, or what I found in having a lot of those conversations and realizing what was working, was that, again, it's the fundamentals of like listening to people, meeting them where they're at, being vulnerable in communication. And those are the things that kind of help in relating to people of any age. And so that's kind of where it started and morphed. And right now it's mostly doing trainings and speaking, creating workshops for companies, or organizations that are looking at how to build better connections, specifically with the newer generation of workers coming in, but then also just across their company in general.
So, would you say, in your experience, do you think like social media has played a role in this disconnect people feel? Like, because when you're in a job, you're in person, right? You're talking to somebody one on one or one to a group. Do you think that's really affected a lot, especially with these younger generations who grew up with social media?
Oh, yeah. There's a book by Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation, and he talks in there a lot about how the younger generation is very anxious coming in. And a lot of that has to do with overparenting in the real world and underparenting in the technical world or technology, and really just allowing people to think that life is what it appears to be on social media. And it's not, and we all know that, right? On social media, we're living our best life and we're putting our best foot forward, and we're hiding all those insecurities and vulnerabilities that we have. And so, as you know, middle-aged and older, we grew up without social media. We know kind of how to discern some of those things, but these younger kids that are being exposed to that as they develop, they don't. And I think all of us get tricked by it at some point too. So it's really learning how to reconnect with people in person, have shared experiences, share those vulnerabilities, share those tough moments. And that's what I love about One Stories, is because I feel like it was the first opportunity for me to do that on like a more public stage. So I've had really, really good and deep conversations with close supporters and friends, but I struggle a little bit more with being vulnerable kind of outwardly and publicly. And
Mhm.
so I feel like that's what One Stories allowed me to do. And that was one of the reasons I signed up, even though it was scary. It was kind of a stretch goal to be able to be in that more vulnerable space with others.
And sometimes they say, like, we teach most what we need to learn, right? I mean, so you're helping people be vulnerable and step into their power and step into community and all of that. And so for you to bring in parts of your story that maybe you had never talked about before, that's intimidating. It's one thing to teach a group of people, right? I've said this before. You know, walking into a room of people I don't know and teaching 500 people, fine. But now telling my story in front of people who I know, like, and trust, oh, that's hard.
Yes.
So okay, let's talk about that then. What was your experience then, even just opening up and knowing that people that you know, like, and trust now are going to see your premiere of your One Story coming up? How were you feeling leading up to that?
I will say that I think it has been a roller coaster. So I knew that this was something that I wanted to do. Again, I do trainings and speaking, and I've done that in front of, but it's usually kind of more clinical information and really not sharing much about myself. And so I also wanted to break into the idea of storytelling versus like just sharing facts or the information about how to do something. Because I know that the stories are more, they help you connect more emotionally. And there's research and education that when you can tie emotions to something, it makes what you're learning stick. So it really
Hmm.
is a retention strategy too. So even in my teaching, I knew that storytelling would be helpful in that aspect as well. So it has been a roller coaster of emotions because I got excited about doing it. And then it's like, as soon as I would start to feel excited, then I would start to pull back and be like, oh no, this is going to be out there. Or what if it doesn't matter? Like, what if everything that I'm saying, people don't care, right? Why is this important? And that was one of the things that I think, you really helped with as far as the coaching is to get us to really think intentionally about that. And what is our message that we're trying to share in telling a story, and why would people care? Why would people want to hear that? So I felt really confident going into the talk, and I felt good that day. And then since then, I've been having a little bit more of that roller coaster again, like, oh no, it's out there.
Hmm.
And what are people going to think?
Yeah.
And I mentioned that to a friend of mine, and they responded and said, if you weren't confident in telling your story, you wouldn't have done this. So you're just having, some nerves about it. But I know you've thought this out. And if you weren't confident in your story, you wouldn't have done this to begin with. So again, sometimes that extra validation from somebody else is helpful to kind of steer you back on track.
Yeah, and I understand that. And sometimes it's not even, yes, it's scary to be vulnerable and tell your story, but it's, well, who's going to care? Right. And
Yeah,
then if you think you put something out there and, like, oh gosh, like, I didn't affect anyone. But the crazy thing about sharing your story, especially in this capacity, is you never know who's listening.
right.
You never know who you're going to reach, or, I mean, somebody might comment, which will be great, but sometimes it's the silent people who maybe don't comment or don't come forward that your story really does resonate with. And so, there's always someone out there that is going to hear this and say, it saved my life, or it just made such a difference. And I think about your story specifically. As a child, what would you have felt like if you knew somebody else who experienced the same thing and they spoke out about it? And you got to
Mhm.
hear that, even if you weren't maybe someone who would get on social media and be like, oh my gosh, I heard this. Oh my gosh, so it kind of makes silent ripples sometimes, even if we don't
Yes.
outwardly see someone commenting and saying, you're amazing.
Yeah, and I think about that too, because I think in my own mind about how many people have impacted me and how many times people have inspired me. And then I think about it and I'm like, I've probably reached out to one of 10 people,
Yeah.
right? For one for every 10 people who've inspired me. And I usually am a person that does, reach out and give that feedback too. So if I'm doing that, then how many other people like you said, are experiencing that without necessarily making a comment. So, and even still, when you do get that one or two comments, to me, sometimes that's enough, right? It's kind
Mm-hmm.
of aligns with that whole idea of the starfish story, if you know that one, where
Yeah.
the little boy's walking along and he throws one starfish into the sea, and the old man says, there's 1,000 of them out here. Like, you're never going to make a difference. And he says, well, I made a difference to that one. And so it's kind of that same thought, like, so what if it doesn't reach 1,000 people? If it reaches one person and makes a difference, that's an impact. So,
And that's how I see it. I always say it's going to impact at least one person,
mhm.
and from there, who knows what they end up putting out into the world that's good because of that. So that it's always kind of that butterfly effect that happens. And yeah, Sharon, I believe it was Sharon Slack had that story, the starfish story, in
Yeah.
her one story, like in the first cohort that went through. But it's so true, and you never know. And I think you were the one, correct me if I'm wrong, you had gone to some sort of a conference and a lot of speakers were phenomenal, but the ones that use stories, you're like, oh, I paid more attention,
Yes. Yep.
you know?
Yep. You can hear a whole bunch of information being thrown at you, whatever it's about. And as soon as somebody throws a story in there or ties it to a story, it makes everything that you're learning more understandable, more tangible,
Hmm.
more applicable. And then, like I said before, it makes it stick. It's the emotions are what make learning stick. And so when you hear those stories, especially stories that appeal to some sort of emotion, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's funny or sad or exciting or whatever that might be, it's the emotion that's going to make something memorable.
And as you're saying that, I'm thinking about, you as a firefighter too. Like, I imagine trainings can feel kind of like, like, okay, you have to do things in certain steps. But then if they were to show you an actual situation where it saved lives, like you're like, oh, I see why those rules, why they matter.
Oh
Right. So when
yeah.
you add something with a story, it makes a big difference, I would imagine.
Yep. I often talk in classes about, I teach a lot of instructor classes, and I tell instructors, like, you need to motivate your students from the beginning. And one of the best
Mhm.
ways to do that is with some sort of hook, like teaching a case study about this is what happens when you don't do this the right way. And so then that's just
Right.
setting the importance for the message, right? And I think it's kind of the same thing. It's like starting with the idea of a failure. And all of us, like, we don't want to share what those failures are that we've had, right? Because again, we want
Mhm.
people to trust us. But what we don't realize is that sometimes sharing those failures and showing our vulnerabilities actually builds trust faster than if we just come across as confident and confident all the time. So, and of course, there's a balance to all of that too, in making sure that you don't overshare, or that it's not
Right.
all about that there's learning moments in it too. But there's such a power in being vulnerable and what that can do to help kind of build those connections and build trust and build relationships.
Which is a perfect segue into why what you do matters, right? Plugged in. And
Hmm.
it helps people show up the vulnerability so that they can experience things differently than showing up. Nobody's confident 100% of the time, right? But if you always show up that way and you're not really being true, then you might scare people away who you really need in your corner. I can imagine people get
Right.
intimidated sometimes by confidence. So I imagine with what you do, I'm sure you help people lean into that more. So how can people learn more about you and what you do?
So I have a website. It's www.pluggedincc.com. And at that site, I share a lot of the different presentations that I give. I also work with both individuals and companies or teams to better understand, what the situation is or what you're struggling with, whether that's helping to build, communication strategies that land, whether it's helping to build, trust and relationships to have high performing teams, or if it's working through your onboarding processes and your recruitment strategies to make sure that you're really connecting and landing with the next generation that's coming in. I think a lot of times we spend more energy in talking about the generational piece of it. We spend more energy wondering why they aren't like us and why they don't want this and that versus like really learning to better understand what it is that they need and what they're looking for, and then us making the adjustments rather than them, changing to fit what we do. Having a company that can be, flexible and adaptable and meet this next generation where they're at, really those are the companies that are setting themselves apart. So
Yeah, that's awesome. So you're kind of saying you're helping them see clearer in their
yes.
vision for their business and their mission statements and working with this newer generation. And I say that because obviously your talk leans into finding focus and seeing clearer just from your personal story, which leans into getting plugged in. So what was that like for you really quick? Like leaning into that personal story and connecting it to what you do. Like, was it easy to make that connection for you, or did you always kind of see it?
I didn't see it from the beginning. I had a bunch of little stories and learning moments that I wanted to share. And I was having a hard time kind of figuring out what the flow was going to look like and what that alignment was. And again, through your coaching, that really helped kind of figure out, where this direction was going to go. But once I realized that I wanted to talk about, it was such a powerful moment. I was only 12 years old, so I didn't know it at the time for sure. But we see the world through the lens which we've created, and that lens has been created by our own experiences, right? So nobody sees the world through the same lens, not even close. And we can never understand what somebody else's lens looks like. And so I learned really early on that what you think you might be seeing might not actually be reality, or might not be what somebody else is seeing. And that ability to look at things from somebody else's perspective is so important in helping you keep an open mind and in helping you better relate and build those relationships too. So for me, it really kind of came down to a lot of the stories that I shared were about when my perceptions were changed, based on different experiences that I've had, and how being able to step into somebody, we always say like walk a mile in somebody else's shoes and you'll better understand, right? But it really is about that. It's really about understanding that, we all have our own personal bias and our own personal lens that we're seeing the world through. And the ability to relate to others not only helps us better see them, but it helps us better see ourselves too.
Yeah, and so those of you listening, we'll play Courtney's one story next, and you'll even hear how her story helped her sister have a little different perspective of who Courtney is. So that was
Mhm.
kind of a cool little part of your story and how you shared that. And because obviously your sister had no clue what you had been experiencing in your life. And I don't want to give any giveaways, so when they hear it, but not only your own perspective, but then when you have that shift, how other people then see things differently, about you
Mhm.
and who they are. So I love how there's all different kind of aspects in your one story, walking everyone through that. So I really appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing this with everyone.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Yep. So in the show notes, if you're listening, is all Courtney's information. You can reach out, contact her, especially if you want to bring in a speaker or a trainer. She's an excellent resource, lots of experience. So bring Courtney in. And up next is Courtney's one story. Thank you.
Your story matters, don't let it fade. When everything changed, you were made.
When everything changed, I was just 12 years old, standing in the lower level of Rush Optical. The optometrist gently placed the glasses on my face, their awkward and unfamiliar weight settling on my nose. And he gestured at the window and asked what I could see. I looked outside, expecting the same fuzzy landscape I had always known, but the world had sharpened. For the first time, I saw that trees actually had leaves. I always thought that trees were just brown trunks with big green blobs on top. I didn't know that you could see individual, delicate leaves that shook in the wind. And then I looked across the street and I saw the Hardee's sign. I had passed by it 100 times, and I had always recognized that red and orange shape. But this time, I could actually read the letters. And then I turned to my mom and I could see everything: the sudden stillness in her face, her wide eyes, the shock, the guilt. She realized in that moment just how long I'd been navigating a blurry world, and I realized just how much I'd been missing. That day, with a single pair of lenses, the world opened up to me in sharp, vivid detail, and I saw clearly for the very first time. You see, I'm so severely nearsighted that without glasses, I could be considered legally blind. And you might wonder how it got so bad. But at 12 years old, I didn't know any different. I thought the entire world saw the world the way that I did, fuzzy, blurry, and out of focus. When I was in grade school back in the early 90s, they would take a group of kids down to the nurse's office to have our eyes checked. And never being one to jump at going first, I'd stand in the back of the line and I'd wait for everybody else to go. And when it was my turn, I would just repeat what everybody else had said. I didn't know that I was supposed to actually be able to read the letters. And then, for whatever reason, in 6th grade, I had to go to the nurse's office by myself. And she had me look into that same black box that I had looked into every other year. But this time, I did not know what to say when she asked me to read the letters. I couldn't see them. And she kept making them bigger and bigger, or so she said. And I still couldn't read them. So finally, she decided just to use the big E, and she asked me what direction it was facing, up, down, left, or right. And I anxiously said, "What E?" I still couldn't see it. All I saw was a big black blob. Needless to say, they contacted my parents and let them know I should probably have my eyes checked, and that led to trying on that first pair of lenses in the basement of Rush Optical. At a future eye appointment, the doctor asked my sister if she wanted to see what I see. And so he placed a pair of lenses on her face so that she could experience what my vision is like uncorrected. And she was astonished at the blurriness and immediately empathetic. "This is what you see?" she said. In that moment, I could feel her understanding deepen, and we were closer because of it. She had seen the world through my eyes. Now, today I wear contact lenses, and most people wouldn't even know this is a part of my story unless I choose to share it with them. And of course, all of you now as well. But it's just a reminder that we don't always see people's full stories. And if ever given the opportunity to see the world through their eyes, we should take advantage of that because it widens our own perspective, it helps build connection, and it teaches us empathy. I didn't know it at the time, but that experience laid the foundation for a lesson that I would carry with me through every stage of life. Sometimes what we think is clear isn't. And there have been moments in my life, both big and small, when I've had to learn to see clearly again. A few years after putting on that first pair of glasses, I picked up a camera, and with it, a whole new way of seeing the world. I fell in love with photography, something that I likely inherited from my dad. And just like that love of images came from him, I followed another passion of his, and in my early 20s, I became a firefighter. It's funny how both roles, firefighter and photographer, often require you to see things that others might miss, to step into a moment, sometimes chaotic and sometimes tender, and to bring clarity. During my firefighter training, I was connected to a summer camp for children who had suffered burn injuries. And let me tell you this, I served as the camp photographer, and we never called these kids burn victims, always survivors. And every single one of those kids, they lived up to that name. I captured their joy, their grit, their courage. And they taught me things about resilience and beauty that no class or camera ever could. I remember one little girl, she had expanders placed underneath her scalp to stretch the skin so that they could do skin grafts to her face and her head where she had suffered burn injuries from a house fire. And I thought about all those days that I had stood in front of the mirror, frustrated about a bad hair day. And then there was the little boy who tore off his shirt as we went to the lake, excited about taking a dip in that refreshing water. But his chest was covered in scars from an accident with boiling water. And I thought about all the times that I had agonized over putting on a swimming suit because I was self-conscious about that extra freshman 15 I had gained and never could quite lose. Those kids, they taught me perspective, and they taught me something vital. They weren't just surviving, they were choosing joy. And not because life had been easy for them, but because they had learned to see joy and they had learned to see beauty in places that we often overlook. And I'm reminded about a quote that I love that says, if you don't learn to find joy in the snow, you will have precisely the same amount of snow in your life and far less joy. And those kids, they taught me that firsthand. They changed my perspective, not just as a photographer, but as a person. And they taught me a deeper truth. Clarity, it isn't always just about eyesight. It's about insight. And it's about how we see ourselves and others in the stories that we tell. In my early 30s, I had the opportunity to take an adventure that any photographer would dream of. And I took a 3-week trip to Africa, Tanzania, that would take me from the village of Iringa to the summit of Kilimanjaro. We started with a medical missions trip to a small hospital tucked in the hills of Iringa, the kind of place where resources are few and need is great, but human connection, it runs deep. And there I met the ambulance driver. Now, his ambulance was an old Bronco with the back seat taken out and a trusty old worn medical bag tossed in the back. His job was not to provide care, but it was to drive the doctor fast and fearless across those bumpy roads to anybody that was in need. And there was something so raw and so real about that. No sirens, no trauma bag, no medical protocols, no certifications, just urgency, heart, and human connection. Later that week, we had the opportunity to attend a 12-hour-long church service. Yes, 12 hours in the village of Ipigolo. And during that church service, each of us had an opportunity to share a little bit of our expertise with the people from the village. And so we had a female doctor who shared a little bit about reproductive health with the women, and the music teacher who led the kids in some songs. Well, me, the firefighter, I got to teach the kids stop, drop, and roll. And that does not exactly roll off the tongue in Swahili. But it didn't matter. We laughed, and we practiced, and we found our rhythm. And I realized in that moment that presence is all that matters for connection. You don't always need a shared language, and you definitely don't need the right words. From there, we went on safari. Again, a dream come true for anybody with a camera in hand. Those wide open plains, the light spilling across the grasses, the elephants in the distance, and that mama lion with her cubs. Every frame was a reminder that if you stop long enough to enjoy it, life will give you something beautiful to capture. But the real showstopper, the one that I'll never forget, was our climb up Kilimanjaro. This 50-mile route took us 6 days to complete, 4 days up and 2 days back down. And we traveled through 4 different climate zones. We started in the rainforest, and then the moorlands, the alpine desert, and finally the Arctic ice and glaciers of the summit. With every step that we took, the air thinned and the chatter faded, and our guides would remind us constantly, pole, pole, or slowly, slowly in Swahili. And it meant to allow our bodies time to acclimate. On the night that we were supposed to summit, we woke up just before midnight. It was pitch black and freezing cold outside. And the goal was to reach Uhuru Peak at sunrise. So we took off, and it was Sanskrit all the way to the top. You'd take a step and you'd slide back half a step. Take another step and you'd slide back half a step. And it felt like you were going nowhere. All you could see were the trail of headlamps on the climbers ahead of you, and the stars that were so bright it felt like you could reach out and touch them. But at 4 a.m., and just 1,200 feet from the summit, I hit a wall. I was physically and mentally exhausted. And I turned to my guide and I said, I don't think I can go any further. And he said, okay, let's go back down. No push, No words of encouragement. No, you've got this. As he turned to head back down the mountain, I followed him, and the rest of my group continued on to the summit. I thought about that morning and that moment so many times. I could have made it. I was physically strong, I was capable, but I lost the clarity, and I couldn't see past my exhaustion. And sometimes when we're that tired, we need someone else to help bring the image back into focus for us. That morning, I needed somebody to say, "You're closer than you think." And if I had heard those words, I'm pretty sure I would have kept climbing. Sometimes what we need most, it's not more gear or more grit. It's somebody that will pause alongside us and say, "I see you. You're not alone. Keep going." Because life, it's exhausting. The world moves fast and our minds stay busy. But if we slow down, pole, and we adjust the lens, we start to see again. We see joy in the small things. We see the people around us, and we see ourselves more clearly and truly for who we are and what we're capable of. In my early 40s, playing the roles of wife, mom, and working professional like so many of us do, I realized something quietly devastating. I was starting to lose myself. I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. And to be honest, I wasn't ready to. Because seeing clearly would mean making changes that I wasn't strong enough to make yet. It would mean admitting that something wasn't working, and it would mean letting go. So I convinced myself everything was okay. And I blurred the edges of my discomfort, and in doing so, I drifted even further from myself. Sometimes we don't see clearly, and it's not because we're blind, but it's because clarity feels too costly. So I chose to see things in the best light possible, and I held on to hope. I told myself, maybe it's not that bad, or maybe it's just a hard season. I wanted peace. I wanted love. I wanted a family. But peace built on denial, it's fragile. And eventually the truth makes itself known, no matter how tightly you close your eyes. And clarity, it doesn't always arrive with a lightning bolt. Sometimes it comes in gentle conversations, in quiet moments, in Sunday tears, and in the way that your body tightens at words that you used to let slide. And that's when I knew something needed to change. It felt like I was wearing somebody else's glasses. Everything was distorted. I would question myself constantly. Am I too sensitive? Am I too much? Am I not enough? I wasn't broken, but I was buried under criticism and confusion. And I started to think that I was the problem. And that's what can happen when you let others chip away at your confidence, one comment, one silence, or one dismissal at a time. But then the people that really knew me, they started reminding me of who I was. My friends, my therapist, my sister, their voices were like breadcrumbs leading me back to myself. And I remember in one session, my therapist saying to me, "Let your friends and your sister be the mirror that reflects who you truly are, not those that continue to tear you down." It wasn't a dramatic rescue. It was a slow return. Because clarity, it isn't a one-time revelation. It's a practice and a choice to keep reaching for the lens that allows you to see yourself clearly. Not long ago, things got really fuzzy for me. On the outside, I was checking all the boxes. I was showing up, doing what I was supposed to do. But on the inside, I was tired. And not just busy tired, soul tired. I was disconnected from purpose, disconnected from joy, and worst of all, disconnected from me. But what brought me out, what picked me up, it wasn't a sudden breakthrough or a big transformation. It was people, honest conversations, and safe spaces. There's a quiet power in learning to see clearly again. When that fog lifts and you realize that it was never your worth that was missing, only your view of it. And that's when the vision for Plugged In took shape. Not just a business, but a response to something deeply personal. I created Plugged In to help leaders in teams and everyday people rebuild something essential, meaningful relationships, and creating connections in a world that seems so connected but feels so isolated and lonely at times. I didn't set out to launch a company. I set out to create what I needed most. Conversations where people feel seen, heard, and grounded. And that's what Plugged In is here to do. Not just help people function, but to help them feel. To help leaders and teams create cultures where people stop checking their phones and start checking in. A company that believes that connection isn't just fluff, it's fuel. Because when we plug in, it changes everything. Not only do we perform better, we feel better, we lead better, we love better, and we live better. And when we plug in, we find our joy again. Because clarity, it isn't just about seeing the world more clearly. It's about seeing yourself more honestly. And connection, it isn't just about being surrounded. It's about feeling understood. So if life feels blurry to you, pause, slow down, pole, refocus, and adjust that lens. Look for the leaves, listen for the laughter, and let yourself be found. And remember, sometimes the clearest vision comes after the fog. Thank you.
Your story matters.